The water had been running for a full 5 minutes now. The steam had coated the cracked mirror above the sink, and the old pipes hissed with the kind of pressure that warned you not to turn the knob too far. She stood still beneath the flow, her head tilted back, her eyes closed. Her ears. Open, the motel was cheap and off the grid just like she needed it to be. There was no check-in, no ID, no cameras. And that was perfect, because if anyone came looking for her, they would not find a trace of the woman she used to be. Here she was. Nobody, just a tired traveler washing away the ghosts of what she had seen and done, but she had not come to disappear. Not really. She had come here because she knew someone would try to make her disappear for good, and she wanted to meet them first. The tile under her feet was uneven, slippery, cracked in places like most things in this part of town. The motel had a smell of mold and old smoke and something worse maybe, but she had chosen this exact room. With purpose. It was the farthest from the main office. It had 2 exits, and most importantly, it had a shower, with a blind spot in the corner, a spot where she could see the door through the mirror. Without being seen herself, she had learned to use her environment as a weapon long ago, and even now, long after she had turned in her uniform and her weapons and her name, she had not forgotten what it meant to be hunted or to hunt. She moved slowly, raising her hand to wipe a patch of the mirror, clean, just wide enough to see what mattered, and as she looked at herself, something shifted deep in her chest, something quiet and sharp like the snap of a tripwire. She had felt it before in dark places on long nights when the enemy was too close and too quiet. And she knew better than to ignore it, her muscles tensed without her meaning. To her breath slowed, her instincts took over without asking for permission. She turned the water a notch hotter to cover the sounds she needed to hear, and then she stood still again, listening through the hiss of the steam and the soft hum of the ancient light above. The floorboard outside creaked, once a small sound, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know how to listen, but she heard it, and she counted 1, then another, then 3 more soft, deliberate steps too close together to be a single person, and not heavy enough to be boots, probably sneakers or soft shoes, good for moving fast and quietly, not professionals but not amateurs either. They knew how to enter quietly, but they didn't know who they were walking into. They didn't know she had been trained to survive, capture, escape death, and worse. They didn't know she had memorized every sound and smell and angle of this room before they even crossed the threshold. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe too loud. Instead, she reached for the bar of soap on the ledge. Not because she needed it, but because she had spent the last hour sharpening it into a crude but functional edge using the jagged frame of the mirror. It wouldn't last long, but it would be enough to open skin and surprise them long enough to get control, because that's all she ever needed, a few seconds to tilt the balance to. Flip the scene from victim to predator. The door opened slowly, quietly, but not quietly enough, and she heard it stop halfway. Not because it hit anything, but because whoever was first wanted to check the room before stepping in. Maybe he thought she left the water running and slipped out the back. Maybe he thought she was afraid and hiding. Maybe he thought a lot of things, but he never considered that she was watching him through the mirror or that she had already marked him as the first one to fall. His shape was vague through the steam. A shadow moving slow, then signaling behind him, with a short twitch of his hand, 3 fingers, then 1 thumb, 5 total, just like she expected. She heard the shuffle of bodies pressing into the small space behind him, trying to make room for themselves without speaking, their breathing low, nervous, uncertain. They didn't expect resistance. Maybe they thought it was an easy grab, 5-on-1, a woman alone, vulnerable, naked in a motel shower, an easy payday or an easy silence, depending on who sent them. But they were wrong, and they were about to learn how wrong they were. She took 1 slow step backward toward the blind spot, the angle where she could pivot fast and take the first man's legs out from under him before he even realized the fight had begun. She let the water keep falling, the steam thickening the mirror almost completely fogged over now, but not enough to block her view. She could still make out the first shape now, inside the room near the sink, his head turning toward the shower, the others behind him spreading out around the small space. One near the closet, one blocking the door, one already circling the bed, trying to cut off the exit, and the fifth she hadn't seen yet. But she knew he was near, maybe by the window, maybe waiting to strike from behind, but she wasn't worried. They thought they had trapped her, but she had been trained in tighter corners with fewer options and worse odds. Her foot slid quietly, across the tile, positioning herself just right, the soap edge in her hand hidden by the cascade of water. She timed her breath, her heartbeat, her pulse. With the moment the first man reached for the shower curtain, his hand slow, his confidence full, and blind to the storm he was about to unleash, the curtain pulled back halfway and he froze, eyes wide. Not at her body, but at her stance. The way she stood calm and ready like she was waiting for him, and that moment of hesitation was all she needed. He stepped forward. The moment she stepped forward, everything shifted. The man closest to her flinched as if he had seen something ancient in her eyes, something primal that broke through the fog of steam and turned the heat of the shower into the cold breath of death. He moved too slow, his instincts poisoned by overconfidence, and his hand was still reaching for the curtain when her arm slashed upward, the sharpened edge of soap slicing a red line across the side of his neck. It was not deep, enough to kill, but it was enough to stun and blind and disorient him as hot blood mixed with the hot water and poured down his chest like melted wax. She did not wait to see his reaction. She had already pivoted on her back foot, twisting low to sweep the legs from under the second man who had rushed in to help, unaware that she had already mapped every possible move they could make in this space, and had committed to none until she saw their first mistake. The second man hit the floor hard, his elbow catching the edge of the toilet bowl with a sickening crunch that made him scream. But the scream was drowned in the rush of the shower and the sudden chaos, as the third man tried to pull something from his waistband, probably a knife, or maybe a stun gun. It did not matter because she was already on him, her foot driving into his knee from the side, folding it inward with a pop that made his legs buckle and his weapon fall to the floor. Her hand closed around the towel rod. She had loosened earlier just enough so that it came free with a jerk as she brought it down across the third man's face like a hammer of steel, his head snapping back against the wall and leaving a smear of blood on the faded wallpaper. 3 down, in less than 10 seconds, but that left 2, and she knew they would not wait much longer to get organized. The fourth man shouted something behind her, something in a language she recognized from operations in a distant desert, a phrase that meant regroup or fall back or maybe kill her now. She turned to see him raising a chair from the corner of the room, swinging it with full force toward her, as if she were a ghost to be exorcised, not a woman to be stopped. The chair came fast, but her instincts came faster. She ducked, rolling low beneath the arc of destruction, and came up with her hand clenched into a fist that drove upward into his gut, lifting him off his feet and smashing the air from his lungs. He dropped the chair and staggered back, gasping for breath, trying to speak, but only spitting foam and fear. Then she saw the fifth, the quiet one, the one who had not entered with the others, the one she had not accounted for, because he had waited for them to distract her. He was already behind her, a cord in his hands, stretched tight and gleaming with wire, as he moved silently toward her back, ready to choke the life from her before she could react. But she had fought too many ghosts in too many alleys to let this end with a cord. She spun before he reached her, the broken rod still in her grip, and as he lunged, she stepped into the motion, letting the wire graze her shoulder, but trapping it with her other hand and using the force of his own attack to yank him forward into her knee, which rose like a piston into his chest, cracking ribs and making his eyes bulge wide with the realization that he had made the same mistake as the others. She did not let go. She twisted the wire around his neck, pulling him closer and whispering, something that only he could hear, words in a dialect from another war, another time, words that froze him where he stood. Because they were words only someone from the inside would know. She had seen his face before, in a file maybe, or in a crowd of enemies long ago. And now he was here trying to end what someone else had started years before, and she wanted answers. Not revenge, not yet. So she dropped him alive, barely breathing, but conscious enough to remember her eyes. The room was silent, now except for the dripping of water and the moans of broken men and the hum of the old air conditioner that had never worked properly. She stood in the middle of it all, soaked and bruised and wild, her breath steady, her heart quiet, her mind racing. Through possibilities like a chessboard of violence and betrayal, this was no random assault, no freelance job, no mugging gone wrong. This was coordinated. They had studied her routine. They knew she was here, and they came with purpose. And that purpose was not to kill her fast, but to test her and see if she still had the fire, if she could still fight, if she was still dangerous. She moved through the wreckage, slowly stepping over groaning bodies, checking for weapons, collecting what she could, without taking her eyes off the broken mirror across the room. Because she knew something else was coming. Something worse. The man she had choked. Had looked familiar. Not because of his face, but because of the way he moved. The way he had waited silent and calculating, letting the others rush in like cannon fodder. That was the mark of someone with training. Someone who had seen real combat. Not the street corner kind, but the kind that leaves sand in your teeth and scars on your mind. And she knew then that he was not the leader. He was. The scout sent ahead to gauge her strength and report back to someone who wanted confirmation. Before making their next move, she found a burner phone, on one of them cheap and loaded with a foreign SIM card. The last message sent just minutes before the attack contained coordinates and a single word engage that meant there were more possibly. Watching, maybe even now, maybe across the street or in the next building or inside the hotel office, pretending to be asleep or drunk or lost. She had to move fast, but not blindly. Not like them. She had to become what they feared most. Again, a ghost. With purpose, a shadow with a name only whispered in regret. She stripped the room of anything useful, took 2 knives, a clean shirt, a wallet with fake IDs, and a keycard to a room that was not this one, and a note folded in the wallet with her name, written in a language she had not seen in years. The same language used by an enemy she had believed dead long ago. The same language spoken by the man she had choked, who now lay unconscious but breathing on the floor near the busted chair, her. Mind raced through years of missions, burned notices, closed files, all of them pointing to something she had buried, and now it was crawling back out of the dirt with a smile and a plan, and she knew she had less than an hour before the next wave came. Stepped into the hallway, barefoot, her hair still wet, her eyes scanning the shadows with the kind of alertness that made people step aside without knowing why. The night outside was thick and loud, sirens in the distance, dogs barking, wind pushing. Against the broken shutters like fingers searching for cracks, she moved fast down the stairs, out the side door, through the alley and into the next building, using the key card she had found, not knowing what she would find, but needing to stay ahead of the hunt. The room was clean, newer, quieter, a planted safe zone, probably where they expected to regroup if she ran, or where they planned to take her if she passed out. But now it was hers, and she locked the door behind her and began to work quickly. Drying off dressing, wrapping her wounded shoulder in gauze, she found in a med kit hidden behind the toilet, clearly not meant for tourists. And then she sat on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes and waited just long enough to feel her heartbeat. Slow. Because she had to think clearly, because the next part would not be about survival. It would be about truth and fire and war. They had come for her not to kill her, but to wake her up, and she was awake now, wide awake, and ready to burn everything. They built if it meant finding the one who sent the message and dragging them back into the light piece by piece. She sat in the dark silence of the new room, surrounded by borrowed walls and false calm, the type of silence that never truly lasts, the type that hums like a wire pulled too tight. Her eyes scanned every corner of the room, every shadow, every line in the wallpaper. Because she had learned long ago that safety is an illusion and comfort is a trap, and right now nothing around her felt real, except for the heat still rising in her chest and the sting of dried blood on her temple. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, breathing slow and steady the way they had taught her in training, back when the world was black and white and enemies wore uniforms and rules made sense. But tonight there were no uniforms, only ghosts and contracts and whispers of a past she thought she buried in the desert sand years ago. She picked up the burner phone again, scrolling through. The outgoing messages looking for a pattern, something hidden in plain sight. But all she found were single-word commands, terse location drops, and coded check-ins. Nothing personal, nothing careless. Whoever was running these men knew how to cover. Their tracks knew how to compartmentalize, and most of all knew her because this was not a random encounter. This was designed with precision, built to provoke and test, and she could feel it in her bones that they were not finished with her. Not even close. This was the beginning, not the end. And the real storm was still out there, gathering force like a wave far from shore. She stood slowly, stretching her arms, wincing as the wound on her shoulder tightened under the pressure. But she welcomed the pain because it reminded her she was still here, still whole, still dangerous. She had spent years training herself to be invisible, not just in a physical sense, but in a way that made her disappear from records, from memories, from old allies, who might ask too many questions. But tonight someone had remembered, someone had pulled the thread that led straight to her. And now they would regret it because she was not just a fighter. She was a tactician, a ghost with teeth. And once she had a scent she never let go. She moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain, peeking through the narrow slit at the street below, where cars passed and lights blinked, and the city kept pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Not anymore. She spotted a man leaning against a lamppost across the street, pretending to smoke, but never lighting the cigarette. His eyes scanning not randomly, but methodically, moving from door to door, window to window, then up to hers, and she moved back quickly, heart steady, mind racing. That was no local. That was a lookout. Probably part of the second team, or maybe just a spotter feeding data to someone parked nearby. She counted the possibilities. 4 vehicles within view, 2 empty. 2. With occupants' faces lit by the dull glow of phones or tablets, too casual for locals, too focused for civilians. This was surveillance, and she had walked right into its center. She opened the nightstand drawer, hoping for a weapon, but finding only a Bible and a broken pen. She tossed them aside and moved to her duffel bag, pulling out what she could salvage from her last drop point. A thin garrote wire folded into the lining, a compact ceramic blade barely visible to scanners, and a burner device loaded with a single encrypted frequency. She tuned it to the code she memorized years ago, one she had promised never to use again unless everything truly went to hell. And now it was worse than hell. It was personal. She pressed send and waited, knowing that if the right ears still existed, someone would answer. Maybe not today, maybe not at all, but the signal was out now. And that meant the game had changed no longer. One woman alone against a faceless threat, but a declaration of war against whoever had decided to reach into her past and drag her back from the peace she had earned through blood and silence. The screen flashed once, a response. Not words, just a single ping followed by coordinates not far from where she stood, a rooftop, half a mile east, with a symbol marked in red that meant ally or trap, depending on who sent it. But she did not hesitate. She packed quickly, tying her shoulder tight, wrapping her blade against her thigh and stepping out the back door of the motel, into the wet air of the night, moving fast and low across alleys and broken fences, weaving through shadows and light like a phantom from a forgotten story. The rooftop was quiet as she climbed the last ladder, her breath shallow, her eyes narrowed. Against the wind, a figure waited there, not armed, not armored, just standing with hands in pockets, watching the skyline like someone out of place in the world. She approached slowly, every muscle tense, ready to strike, but something about his posture told her he was not here to fight, at least not her. He turned as she reached him, and the sight of his face made her heart stop for half a second. Not from fear, but from memory, because she knew him not from this life, but from the last, the war before. This one, the mission that never made it into the files. He said her name, the one no one used anymore, the one she had buried with her uniform, and she almost didn't respond, but then she nodded once, sharp and quiet, and waited. He explained quickly. No wasted words, just truth raw and fast. Someone had reopened a closed file, the file that held everything about her. Her ops, her kills, her failures, and most dangerously, her weaknesses. And now they were coming not just for her, but for others. Like her ghosts who were meant to stay buried, agents burned and forgotten, now hunted like prey by a new power rising from the ashes of old wars built not on flags or nations, but on data, money, and silence. She asked who, and he shook his head, not out of ignorance, but out of fear. Because the name was not one they said aloud, not even here on this rooftop where the wind carried secrets into the night. But he gave her something better. A location, a name that led to another door, and behind that, Dar was someone who had answers, not all of them, but enough to light the trail. And that was all she needed, a trail and the promise of fire. She left him there, fading into the dark as she moved toward her next target, the city shifting around her, like a maze designed to keep her running, but she would not run. Not anymore. She had remembered who she was and what she was capable of, and now the only thing standing between her and the truth was a room.